Today we have some more actual history about the settlements of the American West. We will be reading about an attack on the Union Pacific Railroad by Cheyenne Indians in 1867. This was at a time following the Civil War, when the Plains Indians were desperately trying to prevent westward expansion. The Cheyenne Indians had been at war with the U.S. government since 1864, when they began raiding settlements in Colorado, and this led to an attack on their camp at Sand Creek. Following this, they moved east into Kansas and Nebraska, and there were fewer attacks on settlements in 1865 and 1866. In this episode, we will read about an attempt by the Cheyennes to stop the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad. This event, which occurred in 1867, would be followed by an all-out war that would commence in 1868. We will be reading from the spring 1958 issue of Frontier Times magazine, a story titled The Plum Creek Incident, written by Carl Ulharik. The cover price on this magazine is 25 cents. So here is the story of the attack on the Union Pacific train workers and the derailment of a train by Cheyenne Indians near Lexington, Nebraska in 1867. Countless Hollywood epics to the contrary, only once were the Western Plains Indians successful in wrecking a railroad train. It happened in south-central Nebraska in the infant days of the Union Pacific, nearly 2 years after the first rail was laid on Missouri River bottomland at Omaha on July 10, 1865, and 21 months before the wetting of the transcontinental rails at Promontory Point, Utah on May 10, 1869. On August 6, 1867, a section gang from Plum Creek Station, now Lexington, Nebraska, was working on a track bed along bluffs leading westward from the broad, flat valley of the Platte. For the sweating terriers rhythmically swinging pick and maul under the blazing sun, it was, "Drill me, Paddies, drill! Drill me, heroes, drill! Drill all day, no sugar in your tay, workin' on the UP Railway." But for the band of Cheyenne watching from the tall brush of the river islands, it meant another chance to strike back at the hated iron monsters which threatened to destroy them. To the Indian, the railroad foretold the extinction of the buffalo. He had seen with dismay how the railroad already had created a market for hides, so that greasy hunters slaughtered the shaggy prairie beasts by the thousands, stripped them of their hides, and left their carcasses to rot on the plains, their bones to bleach white in the sun and rain. Moreover, the still free Plains Indians had seen what had happened to the Omaha, the Otoe, the Pawnee, and the Winnebago, caught in the backwash of the white man's civilization. Once free as the winds, they now eked out a miserable existence on the fringes of settlements, living on the white man's garbage, the butt of cruel jokes, scorned by cutthroats, thieves, and honorable men alike. In all this, the Plains Indian saw his own degradation, and fought back desperately. He raided surveying parties and construction gangs, killing, scalping, looting, and burning, but sometimes he acted with childlike simplicity. Once, 30 braves, 15 to each end, stretched a rawhide lariat across the path of a locomotive, only to be left with bruised bodies, cruelled, scorched hands, and with minds sorely puzzled. So now the Indians watched and waited until the section gang, its work unfinished at day's end, dropped pick and shovel, maul and bar along the lonely stretch of track, gathered firearms, set the handcar on the rails, and pumped back east to Plum Creek Station. The mounted band of 25 to 40 Cheyenne, said to have been led by Chief Roman Nose, came out of hiding and splashed through the shallow Platte to the right-of-way. They dismounted, picked up the tools, and set to savage will. They tore down a single telegraph line and used the wire to fasten a tie across the rails. They pulled out spikes and raised the rails about 3 feet, wedging a block of limestone under them. Finally they hid in the tall weeds along both sides of the track, in patient ambush for the brass-bound demon, which snorted clouds of smoke and pillars of fire from its tall funnel-shaped stack, and with its whistle wailed the red man's dirge as it tore across the prairie. But this was only the prelude to the main act, which was to focus the attention of the entire nation on something that Union Pacific's chief engineer, Grenville Dodge, already had reported in confidence to General William T. Sherman. His report said, "We cannot hold our men to our work unless we have troops. Our station men will not stay at tanks and stations 20 miles apart, unprotected. I tremble every day for fear of a stampede. I have smothered all of the recent attacks, and kept them out of the press. General Augur and myself know it, but should our men get at the real truth, they will stampede. Stage agents, telegraph men, emigrants, tie contractors, and railroad men of all descriptions out there are pressing for protection. When the track workers reached Plum Creek, Agent Sam Wallace was waiting with news that there was more work to be done that night. The telegraph wire to the west, he said, had gone dead about 7:30. After a snatched supper, Wallace, Tim Delahunty, Tim Murphy, Pat Handerhand, John Kern, William Thompson, and Pat Griswold took tools and guns and set out on the handcar to find the break. It was about 9 o'clock when they noticed a small fire along the north side of the tracks, just about where they had been working during the day. Curious, but having no reason to suspect a force of Indians in the vicinity, they pumped ahead. Then it happened. The handcar hit the tie, jumped the track, and spilled the 7 men along the right-of-way. They hardly had time to collect wits and pick up dropped firearms when Roman Nose and his frightful horde, yelling and whooping, shooting arrows and guns, broke out of hiding. The railroaders opened fire and began a retreat on foot toward the station, some 3.5 miles back, but the circling Cheyenne cut them off, and Thompson, Handerhand, and Griswold were trapped as they attempted a breakthrough. Handerhand was hacked to pieces with tomahawks. Thompson was felled with a blow to the head. Griswold was shot in the hip, but managed to evade the killers. In the running fight, the 4 other railroaders shot one Indian and wounded the pony of another. This stopped the Cheyenne momentarily, and in the darkness Wallace, Kern, Murphy, and Delahunty, plunging into rough terrain, made good their escape and reached the comparative safety of the station. Back at the ambush scene, one of the Indians was taking Thompson's scalp, when a 17-car freight, the light of the engine's square headlamp cutting a pale yellow path in the night, came chugging in from the east. The General Sherman-type locomotive hit the raised rails at about 25 miles per hour, bowled over like a wounded jackrabbit, and impaled itself a T-rail, completely piercing its boiler. The tender catapulted over the engine, the 3 front cars filled with brick and coal piled up. Fireman George Henshaw was killed, Engineer Brooks Bowers critically injured. The brakemen F.L. Barker and Fred Lewis vanished. They turned up the following day on a Platte River island. Conductor Kinney was unhurt, and aware that a follow-up train was only minutes behind, raced down the tracks and waved it to a halt. With the fast-thinking conductor aboard, the second train backed to Plum Creek, where the 4 handcar survivors were found. Griswold, his hip wound not serious, staggered in some time later. He said he had escaped when the Cheyenne had turned their attention to the wreck. Thompson was believed dead, hacked to pieces as Handerhand had been. The telegraph wire cackled with news of the wreck, and Union Pacific headquarters at Omaha, 230 miles to the east, ordered the railroad men to Elm Creek, where they spent the remainder of the night in a sod dobe. Headquarters also notified General Augur, who ordered 1 company of infantry from Omaha and another from North Platte to the scene. In the morning, the railroad men, reinforced by a number of settlers, decided not to wait for troops, so heavily armed they boarded the train to reconnoiter. When it reached Plum Creek Station, thick plumes of smoke in the distance indicated the probability that the Cheyenne still were burning the cars. The crew coupled a flat car loaded with ties to the front of the engine, and the armed men clambered aboard, ready for business. As the wheeled fort was being pushed down the track, the men aboard saw a man stumbling about the right-of-way, dressed only in a shirt. It was Thompson, his scalped head covered with blood, which had blackened and dried in the hot morning sun. One of the party said it was the most horrible sight he had ever seen, and he hoped never to see another. After he was taken aboard, Thompson said he had regained consciousness, found himself alone while the Cheyenne were looting and setting fire to the cars, and had crawled off into the darkness. The train was stopped as soon as the smoldering ruins of the freight were sighted. Using a spyglass, the railroaders saw Indians with long streams of calico tied to their ponytails making high carnival, racing up and down and whooping and yelling. Others were stomping a victory dance in boots which had the bottoms cut off, wearing the tops as leggings about moccasined feet. Still others were bunched around 2 barrels of whiskey, celebrating with white man's firewater the defeats of the Iron Monster, which they had at last found vulnerable. Patrick Delahunty, brother of Jim, downed an Indian with a shot from his .50-70 caliber rifle. At this, the Cheyenne picked up their dead, and, yelling their defiance and derision, raced off. The rescue party found Engineer Bowers alive, hanging by one leg from the side of the cab. He was terribly mangled, and his scalp had been taken. He died soon after he was taken down. Dry goods, new boots, coffee, sugar, and other provisions were scattered about, helter-skelter, and found among the litter was a scalp. When it was shown to Thompson, he looked at the long auburn hair and claimed it as his own. When Thompson was sent to Omaha for treatment, he took along his scalp in a pail of salt water, hoping that by some miracle of surgery it would be made part of him again. His hopes, of course, were dashed. Dr. R.C. Moore, who treated Thompson, made this report to the case to the second annual meeting of the Nebraska State Medical Society. William Thompson, an employee of the Union Pacific Railroad, was scalped by the Cheyenne Indians near Plum Creek Station on the night of August 6, 1867. He was placed under my care on the morning of the 8th, about 36 hours after the wounds were inflicted. The scalp was entirely removed from a space measuring 9 inches by 7. The denuded surface extended from 1 inch above the left eyebrow backwards. There was also a severe tomahawk wound, also a slight gunshot wound through the fleshy part of the right arm. Suppuration was very profuse, but the patient, being strong and in excellent health, rapidly recovered. He had severe neuralgic pains on the right side of the head and face, but in about 3 months all pains ceased, and nearly the entire surface was cicatrized. Soon after his recovery, Thompson returned to the old country, letting it be known that the American West was more than he had bargained for. However, he did leave behind a part of him, his scalp, which he gave to Dr. Moore. Thompson's scalp is preserved in a sealed glass bell at the Omaha Public Library, a grisly reminder of the only time the Plains Indians succeeded in killing an iron monster before it destroyed their way of life forever. So that's it for this episode about the attack by the Cheyenne Indians on the Union Pacific Railroad in August of 1867. It is unclear why the Cheyenne Indians left William Thompson's scalp. It could be because they had to leave quickly when they were being fired upon by the rescue group. It seems unlikely that they would leave such a trophy unless by mistake. This event was really a prelude to a much larger battle that would break out about 1 year later. We are going to be doing another video on those events, and Chief Roman Nose will play a conspicuous role in many raids and attacks on the Kansas and Nebraska settlers, until he would finally meet his end. There is also another Cheyenne chief, who was only a teenager during the time of these events, named Henry Roman Nose. I have not been able to confirm whether he was related to the Roman Nose who led this attack on the train. Henry Roman Nose would later be chief of the Cheyennes, particularly when they were settling down on their reservation. He was a proponent of education and training. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has been cast aside as unworthy to discuss on history channels on TV. But here on this channel, we keep our worthy history alive by reading directly from old books, magazines, and other sources. If you'd like to help keep actual history alive, then you can join our Patreon page or become a YouTube channel member. For $5 per month, you will have access to our members-only videos, and your contribution to promoting actual history will be recognized at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.